Hey, welcome back. Hope things are going okay. I'm hopefully that you're doing well. I have a really interesting book today, so we're going to get started because I think it's going to become a little bit longer than usual, but very interesting. I think you'll find a lot of value into this one. But it's called The Science of Accelerated Learning, and this is by Peter Hollins. Hollins. And it's the advanced strategies for quicker comprehension, greater retention, and systematic experience. And it's there's a lot to that. And learning is usually something we have to force ourselves into. And not a lot of people discover or even were taught how to learn. And it takes a lot of experience to understand how you learn. And the author of this book, Peter, he describes himself as a lifetime learner, and he has 2 degrees in psychology, and he writes a lot of self improvement and personal development, and he stories, and he loves human behavior books. So there's a lot into that, and think about learning. For example, we go through K through 12 schools, right? If you go to private schools, whatever school you did go into, but you're eventually taught the same kind of skills to make yourself prepared for the real life. Basic writing, language, math, science, a little bit. Humanities, history, all that good stuff, and that kind of sets you up to be more prepared through life. And nobody really teaches you how to learn, though. And that's kind of the hard part. And so learning is how you create the life you want. And learning is an only way to create a better life of the vision you have for yourself. So let's kind of lower this down a little bit. Let's go down a little bit. What is learning? I mean, you ever thought about this? What is learning to you? Well, here's kind of what I describe it as. It's a process of acquiring new information, skills, behaviors, experiences, study, or instructions. And it's really a change in your behavior. When you learn something new or learn something, it kind of alternates or transforms your thinking. Let's just describe it as that. And it occurs in many forms. So when you learn it in school, it's more formal. Here's what you learned about this. Let's test you on it and see if you get it. See if you can re-ingurgitate it in a way. When it's informal, it's more like you're taking what you learned and applying it to life. Experimental is when you're kind of directing it to an experience that you learn the skill. Observational, it's kind of like the outcomes of life. You're watching what's going on in the environment and you're learning from there. And cognitive is like you're thinking about it. You're thinking, okay, I observed that. Now I'm thinking about why that is. Kind of like when we were like people watchers. We're kind of learning about different things and learning from them. Or maybe you're learning not from them. You're just watching. You're not really doing anything. But learning has different ways of manifestations. So the factors, the limitations, the conditions that affect our ability to learn is we have many factors. One is attention spans. It takes about 18 minutes instead of 45 minutes. Our attention spans as humans are very limited. I think there was a study back a long time ago, wasn't that long ago, like 10 years ago. I forgot what it was. You can research this if you want. We were compared to goldfish attention spans, and goldfish actually have about a 5 to 6 second attention spans. Humans have about a 4 to 5 attention spans. So we're being compared to goldfish attention spans. And that's why these videos or any video should be about 18 minutes instead of 45, because more than 18 minutes, your mind starts to wander off. Even the first 4 minutes, 5 minutes of a lecture, our minds develop, we get attention to somewhere else. So we can't really pay attention that long. unless you are disciplined in that. And then another thing about this is that your planning schedule. So we have to plan to learn. Being in a segment, in a condition, we need time to get things done. A lot of it's focused. Not being focused enough is going to hurt us. And the third thing that really has our abilities is the concepts before the facts. Understanding before memory hits in. Why we are learning this, or maybe this questions that I have for that concept. And really that's a kind of an additional way to kind of learning. So so in the book, Peter describes there's two possible ways of learning. And there's two theories about this. One is surface learning, and the next one is deep learning. Surface learning and deep learning. So let's describe them. So he calls it surface learning. Surface, like how you have the planet Earth and you have a surface on top of the Earth, you have a surface. So anyway, you're gaining knowledge and skill in facts and memory, in memorization. That's it. You're just getting those facts in, and you're learning how to play with that information. Deep learning. So here's the Earth, not on the surface anymore. You're going to go into the Earth. You're going to go deep into the stuff. That's kind of where the abstractness of coming into. That's kind of like the getting below the information and trying to analyze it to make it work for you. And so that's surface learning versus deep learning. And so there's a lot of patterns that go with that. Pattern recognition. You're trying to relate it to big ideas in your life. Aristotle, if you don't know who Aristotle is, he was a Greek philosopher, mathematician, scientist. He had to do with logic and a lot of other things. You can look him up. But he lived about 300 BC. And one of his things is that if you want to learn something, you have to associate it to something in real life. So if I wanted to learn how to, let's say, ride a bike, you can't just observe to ride a bike. You got to be on the bike, and then you have to keep going. You have to assimilate to real life. You got to get on that bike and keep on pedaling. And that's kind of like what memory is. You got to keep that practice going. And so a lot of those concepts kind of explain themselves. And so it's kind of like the Miranda rights. So if you don't know what the Miranda rights are, if you are arrested for something, they got to read you your rights. You got the right to remain silent. Anything you say will account against you in a court of law. You have the right to attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be acquitted to you or something like that. I know that because I studied a little bit about the Miranda rights when I was interested in criminal justice when I was at a JC. Yeah, you try different things. You don't have no idea. Another story. But you have those Miranda rights in your head because one is that those are your when you get arrested, the police officers have to read you your rights because those are what you can do, what you have the opportunity to do. Okay, so that's a lot of critical analysis there. Now, when we go through life, we have what we call these heuristics. Now, heuristics in social psychology, these heuristics, they're patterns of thought or behavior that organize in a category of information that relationships to other things. So here's an example. When you go to a birthday party, you have to be excited, right? You have to show enthusiasm. You have to wish happy birthday. You got to eat the cake. And you know what to expect. When you go to the dentist's office, you know what to expect, right? Your heuristics, you check in, and then you sit down. But then you kind of maybe get a pain in your psychological pain. It's like, okay, I'm going to get a pain because I'm at the dentist's office, and I don't like the dentist's office. That's your trained categorical heuristics. Or you go to a funeral, and you don't act surprised, or maybe act surprised, but you're not being happy, right? Unless you're an ex-wife or something like that, or ex-husband or something like that. But okay, but when you go to a funeral, you have this heuristics to moan. Not moan. You kind of just be in a state of calmness and maybe just you're sorry, and stuff like that for the loss, right? Anyway, so those are heuristics. So your brain, you get your brain into this growth mode, this mindset, into the moment mode to learn something, right? And so you have notes and you have experiences. And notes are kind of like the old versus new stuff that you have in your life. Experiences is kind of like what you have done in your life. Maybe those a lot of mistakes that you are understanding about yourself. You're gaining a learning perspective. And it's really this anticipate frustration. So, for example, when we get frustrated, we have poor planning because maybe we didn't think about that. We didn't prime ourselves into understanding what we're going through, and we get frustrated at things. So if you're a parent, maybe you get frustrated at your teenager. Maybe your teenager did something that you wouldn't do in your life, and you get frustrated because it's like, oh my God, why'd you do that? You don't know. You haven't maybe had that experience yet. And so you want to alleviate that understanding or that frustration because you haven't learned it yet, and you want to learn it. And so memory comes in. So there's two types of memory. If you ever take a psychology class, they should teach you this, right? Instead of on the surface or deep learning, they teach you that you have short-term and you have long-term memory. Those are the two types of memories you have in your head. So think of it this way. You have short-term and long-term memory. So short-term is kind of like you're learning the facts, names, and stuff like that. You're trying to do this, but you don't pay a lot of attention to it, and then it escapes you. Well, you didn't have enough time to put it into practice. So your short-term memory is about 30 minutes before it kind of gets transferred into your long-term memory. If you really put investment into it, timing, memorization, learning something to associate it, that goes into your long-term memory after a while. But if you don't do anything with that information you just learned, it's going to flow out the window. And there's kind of like three levels to that. There's encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is like, okay, I observe something, and then I'm kind of analyzing it a little bit, and then I'm encoding it in my head. Say, okay, what is it with a memory? Was it emotion? Is it something perceivable? And then after I get that connection, then I transfer it to a storage. So we're going to talk about that. So when you're encoding something, you're using your senses. Your senses, your eyes, maybe your smell, your taste, your hear, maybe hands-on. You're using your senses to grasp that, to encode that, and then you're using your consciousness and subconsciousness to help you out, and your focus on and your attention to focus on that, and then it kind of goes into your storage. Your storage is kind of like the process and determines where it goes in your head, and storage is all over your brain. This is kind of like what Alzheimer's is in dementia patients. They actually, it's very bad, right, when you get older, but it has memory all over. Long-term memory is still there. Short-term is not. So when you have dementia or Alzheimer's, the short-term memory is kind of gone. The long-term is there. They still remember old things. If you ever have anybody experience with that, they remember things that happened many years ago because it's still in their head. The retrieval is kind of like what's a cue or a recite something to get that information across. So you might recite the Pledge of Allegiance of the flag. That's a long-term memory stuff because your cue is I'm going to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. It's really just you're recalling and your recognition of that, and you're sometimes relearning things too as you go. And we have what we call the forgetful curve. Now, the forgetful curve says that, the first time you learned it, you're like way up here. But as 1 day goes down, 2 days go down, 3, 1 week, 1 month, you start to flatline if you're not rethinking about it or getting it back or reviewing it, I should say, reviewing it. And so you have a forgetful curve that kind of flatlines. And usually after 3 or 4 days, it really just seems to kind of flow out the window. That's why cramming for a test or cramming for something does not work. It works maybe for the first day, but after that, everything that you just crammed for is gone. And that's why cramming is not always the best. There's benefits and there's pros and cons. But being able to recall information is always the goal. But more realization, we choose to be shooting for recognition and to learn how to experimentally use those cues and hints in our daily lives. There's a lot there. I'm sorry to kind of butcher that, but Willie, what he's trying to say in the book here, Peter, is he's saying that all the information that you're trying to make sense of it and you're trying to associate to real life stuff and getting those cues or those triggers to memorize it, that's the hard part because you're trying to make that information useful and you're trying to practice. And practicing is, like he says in the book, maybe like calling out it, rereading things, reread your notes, making flashcards. All this stuff is really helpful in learning something because flashcards are good if you make them one sentence, not the whole thing. Rereading things, but rereading and maybe being active when you're reading it. Do a little bit of highlighting, but don't overdo it. And think of the big idea. And reread your notes every day or redo your notes and associate things that you have done in your life with those notes. And so you're kind of doing what we call active reading, active learning techniques. In 2013, a researcher examined 10 different methods, relatively easy to use for active learning, but 5 methods the team thought were the poor for learning. So out of after 10 different strategies, methods for learning, these 5 models came out to be the worst. Interesting. So one is summarizing. Summarizing doesn't do a whole lot of good because one, let's say you're a student, right, and you're trying to summarize a book. Summarizing is good, but if you don't put anything else to attach to it, it's not going to work. So it doesn't work effectively because summarizing is like you're reading a book and right now we're summarizing, but talking about certain things and applying certain things helps that summarization go. So I think what I'm trying to show you is that there's little things that should be attached to this too, not just summarization. Another thing is highlighting. A lot of us like to highlight. We like to take a highlighter and we just like to highlight everything in the book. It doesn't do your brain anything. Highlighting a little bit of stuff, yes, but don't overdo it. And so this is like, you're marking it with bright colors. Yeah, bright colors can be beneficial to your brain. Good. But the research has found that it was a lot of distracting because, I have a highlighter. I'm just going to kind of highlight this because it's useful. It gives me something to do while I read. Another thing is maybe these strategies, these kind of like these phrases. So mnemonics. I'm going to butcher that name. Mnemonics. It's MNEMONICE. Mnemonics, vices. I probably said that wrong. I'm so sorry if I butcher that name. You're kind of like you're thinking about it more, but you don't have it down. And so I kind of disagree with that. I think that would help you out. But like I said, this is not my research that I'm looking at. This is how I'm feeling about it. You're kind of just coming up with something. And drawing a picture is always good, but not the best, they say. I don't know why. Rereading is good, but you're rereading for a point. You don't just reread something to kind of just reread it. You want to reread it to make sense of your brain. And so there's no solid evidence that all these methods work. I think that's the point of this. There's no solid methods that these research. There's probably they do work to a certain extent, but there's not solid evidence they do work 100%. And I think that's kind of like the bottom of it. My review of this is that I think these methods do work to some, but they need experience and training for. You can't just have somebody do flashcards and not be trained. You can't have somebody do a summary and not be trained how to do it. I think that's the part that he's trying to point at, and I point at, is that you need to be trained how to do it. And without the training, it's not going to work. And so there's 5 effective techniques for this. One is that practice testing. Practice how to test your retrieval, your memory. Practice how to test is that you're trying to get other forms of, maybe you're being tested on something and you want to have practice questions. That's always good. Maybe distributed practice. You're taking what you learn and you're putting it into other things in life. Elaborating interrogation. What's the why question? Why am I doing this? Why do I have to study this? Why is this word important? And you're doing a lot of investigation. You're lining the questioning, and you're being a detective. You're being that seeking out information to relate to that topic to make it suitable for your learning needs. You're doing a lot of self exploration. You're kind of saying, okay, you're thinking out loud. What's the problem? You're kind of making it simplicity for yourself, making it simple. Keep it simple, right? And you're kind of doing you're investigating yourself, and you're hearing yourself. Sometimes when you go around and you're trying to make sense of stuff, people speak to themselves. Sometimes you think that's crazy, but if you're learning something and speaking out helps your brain get another sense. And so there's another thing called, you're trying to build one skill to relate to another skill. And this is called interleaving practice. Interleaving, you're connecting all your practices together, and you're making like this block learning. And so research indicates that this is the best method, because you're connecting everything into togetherness. You're associating what Aristotle said. You're associating everything to one thing. And so blending all the concepts together is the best thing. And not multitasking is not a very good thing, because it distracts your brain from focusing on one thing. And this is why multitasking is not always the best option to do things. And it's a lot of space retention too. You want to space things because you can rehearse it and experience it as well. And also your brain needs time to store this information. You need time to connect things to maybe old learning. And you need a schedule. A schedule does help your brain to kind of keep track of things. This is why, do this at this time of day, do this. Do it for this long. This duration. And this is why cramming is not always the best thing, because there's a difference between your spacing as you're thinking out versus short intervals. And it's really just kind of a way to cram so much in without understanding what you're doing. And flashcards are good to do, but you got to make them small wording and to the point. And so you're trying to make learning secondary. You're like learning something new without realizing it. So for example, if you look at the Karate Kid, in the Karate Kid 1, Miyagi was teaching Daniel to wax on, wax off on the car, polish, wax on the car. And then after a while, he said, "Oh my God, I was waxing this car and now I know how to block." And you're kind of making it secondary. So you're doing something in your life to make it practical. And you're seeing that. And you're learning something, but you play something that requires that learning. You're making learning the journey, not the endpoint. You're making learning relevant. Often people have difficulty becoming motivated purely because of the duty or obligation they have to do. Learning is hard. Learning sometimes is impossible because it takes time. And we always, as human beings, we get busy. We want to always learn to take the path of least resistance, because we are living a busy world. And sometimes that's not always a good idea, because our brain was not like that many years ago. Think about before technology, how we learned. Well, you took a book and you just spent time reading it. You spent time reading it. But what we do today sometimes is spend time reading it and then go do something else, like the ADHD or something like that. And so it's not about the pain of learning, it's about the game in progress. And so we have to have value into that. And it takes time. And we live in a busy world. So learning becomes a task to find relevance, meaning, and motivation in the process. And learning is a very fluid process. There's pitfalls to it. You have to have discipline. You got to teach yourself discipline. Teach yourself discipline. If you want to learn something, you got to teach yourself discipline. It's a growth versus fixed mindset. You are growth. You are fixed with this many values, this many skills in your life. And if you don't think that you can go out of that, well, that's the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. And so there's different learning styles out there. And you have to find what's right for you. And notes are good. Learning happens when it's active and at least partly self-driven. You got to learn. You want to learn something. You got to be motivated. You have to be up for it. So there's 4 types of effective and great ways of learning: note taking, note editing, note analysis, and note reflection. So if you think of Cornell notes are great, but it's not the best way I would learn. I think Cornell notes kind of got this idea from what's going on. You have a summary, you have all your information, you have your on the side, you have your formulas, and on the bottom you have a summary, right? If you know what Cornell notes are. But I think that there's other things into that. So part of it is when we put no effort into something that we're learning, it's not gonna last very long. And paraphrasing and underlining in color and post-it is really good sometimes. Just because you gain a new skill or knowledge doesn't mean you have learned it, because you have to apply it. And there's a whole lot to this. And my summary of this book is that learning is a verb, right? There's a behavioral change to learning. You have to learn by trial and error. You have to have a mindset. You have to have the attitude. You have to have a belief. You have to have discipline. Put your butt in a chair, right? You have to have progression. I see it gradually increasing my information. I'm learning this. It takes time. You have to have deliberate practice. You got to keep going. You got to keep punching. You can't just stop. You have to have full attention to it and not all over attention. It has to be measurable. You have to see it, because then it feels rewarding. And it has to make improvements on your life. So to make this kind of more is that we have a learning pyramid, and you can look this up. It's called the cone of experience. You can look this up. It's called the cone of experience. This is kind of like our learning pyramid. And at the very top, 90% is to get something, you've got to teach it to somebody immediately. If you know something, if you want to know something, you got to teach that to somebody else. And 5% on the very bottom is like lectures and listening. That's about 5%, because some people, they can hear about it, but they have to see it too. And that's just only 5%. And teachers know this. They should know this about people in presentations, presentations. But you have to have differentiated experience too. You got to know yourself, and you got to have different ways of learning to make things meaningful for yourself. And so it's really just the conditions of the learning too, and the memory retention that you form for your long-term to short-term. And you have to have active ways of learning too, to make learning more fun and detrimental to yourself too. And the sooner the better for feedback is important, because feedback is a learning thing for yourself. And good feedback is called constructive criticism for yourself. Maybe you didn't learn this and somebody's telling you. Maybe you're a debater, you're debating at something, an argument. Or maybe you just want somebody to criticize and say, hey, I learned about the cell in biology and they're criticizing it. Well, you got this part wrong. Okay, great. You're kind of getting that feedback, and you're being honest with yourself. And you have to be always aware of that. Feedback's good too of your learning because it reinforces your learning too. But it takes a lot of persistence too and attention. Very interesting book. I'm sorry to go a little bit longer, but like I said, there's a lot to this book, and he wrote this book not very long ago. So I think this was about a 2017. Not a very long book either. A lot of value information. It's a good thing to have on your bookshelf. So hopefully that you get around to get something like this. It didn't cost that much. Amazon's probably the best way to get this. And very interesting topic. There's a lot of value in this. Hopefully you found this rewarding, like you should always do. And I will see you on the next video.